By dawn, the whole town knew. A black girl had spent the night alone in a stranger's barn, curled up in hay with nothing but her worn shawl for warmth. By sunrise, folks came from every direction, farmers, shopkeepers, even children tugging their mothers' skirts, and they laid gifts at her feet. A loaf of bread, a patched quilt, a pair of shoes better than anything she'd owned. No one asked her name at first. No one asked where she'd come from. They just gave and gave until the barn door could barely close. But here's what no one understood that morning. She hadn't come to beg, and she hadn't come to she'd come running from something, and the past had a way of riding fast behind her. The summer of 1874 was mean in Texas. The rivers shrank to trickles, and the fields cracked like broken pottery. Folks said even the grasshoppers had given up and blown away. That was the world Clara James walked through, 15 miles on blistered feet, her shawl torn where barbed wire had caught it. She didn't look back. Behind her was a plantation house half in ruin, a family name that meant nothing to her now, and the sharp memory of voices shouting when she slipped into the night. When she saw the shape of the town, roofs crouched low against the rising sun, she stopped. She had no kin here, no money, not even the courage to walk straight down the main street with white eyes fixed on her. What she did have was exhaustion. She spotted a barn on the edge of town, paint peeling, door ajar. A horse nickered inside, but no one came. She slipped through the shadow, pressed her back against the cool wood, and let herself breathe. For the first time in days she felt almost safe. But barns don't stay quiet long. Before dawn's gray turned to gold, a man came walking. He wasn't young, beard shot with gray, shoulders stooped from years of hauling more than he should. His name was Matthew Riley, a farmer who owned little more than the barn itself and the horse that called it home. He pushed the door wide, expecting nothing more than the smell of hay. Instead, he froze. There she was, curled in the straw, eyes wide open though her body sagged with sleep. She didn't scramble, didn't beg, just met his stare straight on. For a long moment, neither spoke. The horse stamped, breaking the silence. Finally, Matthew said, slow and plain, "You lost, girl." Her lips parted but no words came. She swallowed, then shook her head, not because she wasn't lost, but because there weren't words enough to explain the kind of lost she was. He set the pitchfork aside, scratched his beard. "Well, you can stay till the sun comes up, then we'll see." She nodded once, that was all. In small towns, secrets walk faster than horses. By the time Matthew's wife, Ellen, brought coffee to the porch, she'd already heard from the milk boy who'd heard from the smithy's daughter. There was a black girl in the Riley barn, alone, ragged. "Matthew," Ellen said, hand trembling just enough to slosh the cup. "You mean to do something about her?" Matthew sipped slow, staring across the fields. "Already did," he said. "Let her rest." But Ellen knew, and Matthew knew, that letting her rest was only the beginning. By noon folks would come nosing, and not all would come with kindness. What happened next, no one quite understood. It started with Mrs. Cafferty from the bakery. She came walking, apron still dusted with flour, carrying a loaf hot enough to steam in the morning air. She didn't say a word, just set it on the step inside the barn, and walked away. Then came young Tom Fields with a pair of shoes tied together by string. "Outgrew 'em last winter," he mumbled, leaving them where she could see. By mid-morning the Rileys' yard looked like Sunday fair. Quilts folded neat, a tin pail of milk, a bundle of apples. Children tugged their mothers close, pointing shyly before ducking behind skirts. Inside, Clara sat cross-legged in the hay, watching the pile grow. Her chest ached, not with hunger, though she hadn't eaten in 2 days, but with confusion. She hadn't asked. She hadn't dared, and still the gifts came. But every kindness has a shadow. For every loaf of bread, Clara remembered the lash her father had felt when he'd raised his voice. For every quilt she remembered the night her mother whispered, "Keep your eyes down, don't give them reason." And for every gift at her feet, she remembered why she'd run. It wasn't just hunger, it wasn't just cruelty. It was the way the master's son had looked at her, eyes hot and hands quick, and the way her protest had been met with laughter. She hadn't waited for worse. She'd taken her shawl and her chance. The barn was safe, yes, but the past had hooves, and Clara knew men like Silas Langford didn't forgive theft of what they thought was theirs. By midday, the sheriff came riding slow. His name was Tom Wilkes, a man too fond of keeping peace by keeping trouble quiet. He dismounted, walked to the barn, tipped his hat at Matthew. "Word is you got company," he said. Matthew spat into the dust. "Word travels fast, faster than sense," the sheriff agreed. He peered inside, eyes settling on Clara. She stared back, jaw tight. "Girl," he said, voice half soft, half warning. "You got kin here." She shook her head. "You mean to stay?" Her silence stretched, then just mean to breathe. Wilkes studied her long, then turned to Matthew. "Ain't against the law, far as I know, but watch yourself. Folks are split already." Matthew grunted. "Let him split." The sheriff rode off, and with his departure, the air grew heavy. Trouble wasn't coming yet, but it would. That night, Clara lay under a patchwork quilt she hadn't asked for, staring at the barn roof. Gifts piled around her, proof of a kindness she'd never expected. But with every creak of wood, every distant hoofbeat, she wondered if her past was riding closer. And by the time the second dawn came, she'd find out just how far whispers and riders could travel. When Clara woke, the barn smelled of fresh hay and apples. Light fell through the cracks in the boards like sharp blades, striping her face. For a moment, she thought she'd dreamed the gifts, the quilt, the shoes, but no, they were there, stacked awkwardly in the corner like treasures a queen might hoard. She touched the quilt's edge, fingers trembling. Her throat tightened. Kindness, she'd learned, always carried a price, and yet no one had asked her for a thing. Not yet. Matthew Riley's wife, Ellen, appeared in the doorway with a tin cup of milk and a bowl of cornbread mush. She wasn't smiling, not quite, but her eyes softened when Clara whispered, "Thank you." Ellen just nodded, set the bowl down, and left. Clara noticed her hand lingered on the doorframe, as if weighing whether to say more, then deciding against it. By the time Clara slipped outside to stretch her legs, townsfolk were already gathered in knots along the main street. The bell from the church rang steady, calling men to early prayer, but most weren't thinking of scripture. They were thinking of the girl in Riley's barn. Some tilted hats respectfully when she passed. Others narrowed eyes, muttering words she couldn't hear, but knew too well. At the mercantile, Mrs. Cafferty defended her loaf. "Bread don't ask a skin color," she snapped at a rancher's wife who called it foolishness. "Hunger's hunger." At the smithy, Amos Hardy swung his hammer harder than usual, muttering that a town too small to spare kindness was no town worth a forge. But at the saloon, men leaned on the rail and spat in the dust. "First she takes bread," one growled. "Next she'll take more." Division cut deep before the sun climbed high. Clara tried to shake the noise from her head, but memories pressed in. The night she fled the Langford place burned clear in her mind, her shawl catching on barbed wire, ripping, the sound of dogs baying in the distance, the light of a lantern swinging as men searched the fields. Silas Langford's voice still echoed, low, entitled, promising what he thought she owed him. That memory sent her heart thudding. She hadn't stolen silver or money. She'd stolen her own freedom, and men like Silas counted that as the worst theft of all. Now, standing in a strange town with whispers circling, she wondered how long it would take for that voice to follow her here. Toward afternoon, a group of children appeared at the barn. They came giggling, shoving one another forward, clutching small treasure. One girl carried a rag doll missing an eye. A boy lugged a jar of marbles. Another held a tin whistle, dented but polished bright. They lined up, solemn all of a sudden, and set their offerings at Clara's feet. "For you," the little girl said shyly. Clara crouched, startled. "What?" The boy shrugged. "Mama says when somebody's lost you give 'em something to hold." Her throat closed. She tried to speak but only managed a soft, "Thank you." The children grinned, satisfied, then scattered like sparrows. Clara sat back against the wall, staring at the doll, the marbles, the whistle. For the first time in years, she felt tears rise, not from fear, but from being seen. Not everyone saw it that way. Sheriff Wilkes returned before sundown, face set hard. He dismounted slow, boots crunching. "Girl," he said, I told you yesterday to keep quiet. Instead, the whole town's buzzing like a kicked hive. Clara stood tall, though her knees shook. I didn't ask for their gifts. Doesn't matter, Wilkes said. Perception's louder than truth. Men'll come knocking, some with open hands, some with fists. He sighed, scratching his jaw. Matthew, you better think on whether keeping her in your barn is worth the fight you're stirring. Matthew folded his arms. Some fights find you whether you want 'em or not. The sheriff grunted. Don't say I didn't warn you. He mounted up and rode off, dust hanging behind like a shadow. Clara knew then, trouble wasn't far. That night, Matthew sat on the porch with his pipe, Ellen sewing by lamplight. Clara stayed in the barn, lying awake under the quilt. Every creak of wood, every distant shout, made her flinch. She thought of her father, long gone from fever, who'd once told her, child, there'll be two kinds of people in this world. Those who see your skin as a wall, and those who see it as nothing at all. Find the latter, and keep them close. She wondered if she'd found some now, or if by morning they'd turn away like all the rest. Then, faint but clear, she heard hooves, not one horse, several. She sat up, heart hammering. Out the crack in the barn wall she saw lanterns bobbing on the far road. Too many for neighbors, too slow for travelers. Her past was catching up. Clara pressed her palm against the rough wood, breath shallow. Gifts surrounded her, tokens of kindness she'd never asked for. But lantern light on the horizon told her something darker was riding in. Men who wouldn't bring bread, or quilts, only chains of another kind. And when they reached town, every gift at her feet would turn into a choice for the people who gave it. Stand with her, or step aside. The barn door shuddered in the night breeze. Clara crouched low, staring through the slats at the glow moving closer down the road. 4, maybe 5 lanterns. The bobbing light made her think of hounds on a trail, their handlers steady and patient. Her hands tightened on the quilt around her shoulders. She hadn't asked for these gifts. Now they felt like evidence, proof that she was worth something, proof men like Silas Langford would never forgive her for claiming. Matthew Riley stepped onto the porch, pipe glowing faint in the dark. He squinted at the horizon, jaw clenching. Ellen, he said quietly, wake the boy. Send him for Sheriff Wilkes. Ellen appeared in the doorway, pale in her nightdress. You think it's them? I know it, Matthew muttered. By the time the riders reached the edge of town, the bell was ringing. Not church call, urgent, offbeat, pulled by a boy too scared to stop. Doors opened, boots pounded, men with rifles slung, women clutching shawls, children peering from behind skirts. The riders slowed to a walk. 5 men, dust on their coats, eyes mean under wide brims. At their head, one Clara knew too well, Silas Langford's foreman, Hank Dobbs. He reined up, grinning at the crowd. Even folks, heard you got something don't belong to you. Girl run off from her rightful place. We'll be taking her back. Murmurs rippled. Some looked at Clara, standing stiff by the barn door. Others looked away. Clara's legs wanted to buckle. Every memory screamed at her to hide. But another voice rose louder. Her father's. Child, truth ain't worth nothing if you bury it deep. You gotta hold it up, even when it burns your hands. She stepped out from the barn, quilt slipping from her shoulders. Her voice trembled but carried. I don't belong to you. The crowd went still. Dobbs laughed. Hear that? She's got spirit. Ain't gonna last long once Silas sets her straight. Matthew moved to Clara's side, arms folded. She's under my roof. That makes her under my word. And she ain't going anywhere. The town split wide open right there. Miss Cafferty, Flower still dusting her apron, called out, she's done no harm. If she wants to stay, she stays. From the saloon porch, a rancher barked back. She don't belong. You'll bring trouble on all of us. A blacksmith's hammer clanged against his anvil as Amos Hardy stepped forward. Trouble's already here. Question is, do we bow to it? The riders sat their horses, grinning. Division was the game they played best. Sheriff Wilkes finally arrived, face pale, breath heaving. Now hold on, he said. No need for blood. Girl, maybe best you go with them, just till things cool. Clara stared at him, disbelief tightening her throat. You'd send me back to chains. The sheriff looked at the ground. Better'n burnin' this town down. The crowd surged with argument. She's just a girl. Someone shouted. She'll ruin us all, came the answer. Through it a child's voice rang clear. The same boy who'd given Clara his marbles. She ain't done nothing wrong. The boy's mother tried to hush him, but it was too late. Others heard, hearts twisting. Ellen Riley stepped forward next to her husband. We gave her bread. We gave her shelter. What does it say of us if we give her up now? Silence followed, heavy, waiting. Dobbs spat in the dirt. Enough, Jarman. Sheriff, step aside. He nudged his horse forward, reaching down like he meant to grab Clara by the arm. That's when Amos Hardy lifted his rifle, cocking it loud. Touch her, he said, and you'll lose more in your hand. The air snapped tight, fingers brushed triggers. Women pulled children back. Sheriff Wilkes lifted both palms, sweat streaking his face. Nobody fire, but everyone knew it wouldn't hold long. Clara felt the world tilt. She could run, slip into the night while men fought each other. She could leave the quilt, the bread, the kindness behind, and save only herself. But the sight of the boy clutching his mother's skirt stopped her. The children who'd laid gifts at her feet, the families who'd risked whispers and shame to show her a shred of dignity. She straightened, voice clear now. I won't run. If you send me back, you'll do it in daylight, where every soul here can see. And if you let me stay, then say it plain, I am free. Her words cut sharper than rifles. The riders bristled, townsfolk whispered, and Sheriff Wilkes froze between them all. It was a standoff with no clean way out, until a figure no one expected stepped into the lamplight, rifle in hand, ready to tip the balance. The street held its breath. Clara's words still hung in the air when boots scraped against the boardwalk. A wiry figure stepped from the shadows of the saloon. Sam Fletcher, gambler, scout, drifter, with more debts than friends. Folks knew him for a sharp eye and a quicker draw. He wasn't the type to get tangled in other people's fights. But tonight his rifle hung easy in his hands, muzzle pointed at Hank Dobbs. Boys, Sam drawled, voice steady. You take one more step toward that girl and I'll paint the dust with your boots. Dobbs barked a laugh. You, Fletcher. You gamble with cards, not your life. Sam's smile didn't reach his eyes. Cards or bullets, odds don't change. And I've never lost when the stakes were honest. The crowd rippled. Some townsfolk edged back, not wanting their names tied to what came next. Others leaned forward, breath caught. Sheriff Wilkes stood frozen, hat in hand, eyes darting like a cornered rabbit. Dobbs shifted in the saddle, teeth bared. You think you're some kind of hero, Fletcher? Not hardly, Sam said. Just a man sick of watching bullies play landlord over souls that ain't theirs to own. That line landed heavy. A murmur rose, not from the riders, but from the townsfolk. A farmer shouted, he's right. Another voice, sharp with fear, don't drag us into the street wasn't just divided now, it was cracking. Towers. It always happens the same way. Not a decision but a twitch. One of Dobbs's men, jittery from the standoff, yanked his pistol too fast. The shot went wild, shattering the mercantile sign. Chaos followed. Amos Hardy fired first, rifle booming. The rider's hat flew off as he tumbled from the saddle. Horses screamed, hooves striking sparks off stone. Women dragged children inside, doors slamming. Clara dropped to the ground, dust in her teeth. Matthew Riley pulled her behind the trough, bullets spitting dirt around them. Sam Fletcher fired with calm precision, each shot deliberate. He dropped one rider's pistol arm, spun another's hat off his head, forcing them into cover. Dobbs roared, spurring his horse forward. The blacksmith's hammer came swinging, Amos charging like a bull. He cracked it against a rider's leg, dropping him into the dirt. Matthew leveled his shotgun, twin barrels barking. One blast shattered a rider's stirrup, sending the man sprawling. Sheriff Wilkes finally fired, his first shot wide, his second grazing a horse's flank. But the sight of him shooting at all seemed to rattle the riders more than the bullets. Dobbs aimed straight for Clara, pistol flashing. Then Ellen Riley, quiet, steady Ellen, stepped into the doorway with her husband's spare rifle. She fired, missing his chest but grazing his hat clean off. The crowd gasped. A housewife had raised her hand against the Langford's men. The tide shifted. It spread like sparks on dry grass. Mrs. Cafferty from the bakery threw open her window and hurled a skillet that clanged against a rider's shoulder. The seamstress, trembling but steady-eyed, fired her father's old musket from a second-floor balcony. A boy barely grown sprinted across the street with a bucket of nails, spilling them under the riders' horses. Hooves clattered, beasts reared, men cursed. For every voice that shouted against Clara, two more now rose in her defense. The riders, once smug, looked less like hunters and more like prey. Tubbs's grin was gone. Dust streaked his face, sweat glistening. He wheeled his horse back, pistol swinging towards Sam. But Jack Callahan, silent until now, rifle braced against a fence post, squeezed the trigger. The bullet split the pistol clean from Dobbs's grip, sending it spinning into the dirt. "Enough," Jack said, voice like gravel. The street froze, guns still smoked, but no one fired. Dobbs sat tall, trying to salvage pride. "You think this ends it? Silas Langford owns half this county. He'll come himself next time." Clara stood then, brushing dust from her skirt, quilt still around her shoulders. She stepped past Matthew's hand, past the trough, into the center of the street. Her voice rang steady. "Then let him come, but he won't find me hiding. Not now, not ever." Silence stretched, broken only by the creak of saddles and the distant clang of the bell still swaying. Finally Amos Hardy stepped into the open, hammer still raised. "She's free. Anybody who says different answers to me." The gray-bearded farmer raised his shotgun, and Mrs. Cafferty lifted her chin. "And me." One by one, voices joined. A chorus. A line drawn. Dobbs looked around and saw not a divided town, but one that had found its voice. His men shifted, uneasy, eyes darting to alleys and escape routes. Dobbs spat. "This ain't finished." He yanked his reins, wheeling his horse hard. The riders scattered, retreating into the dark. The street sagged with relief, the air heavy with gunpowder and sweat. Clara stood in the center, gifts at her feet, townsfolk ringing her in a circle of resolve. For the first time she felt less like a runaway, and more like a person rooted. But as the echoes of hooves faded, one truth burned clear. Silas Langford wasn't done. And when he came, it wouldn't just be 5 riders, it would be war. The barn creaked in the cool hours before dawn. Clara lay awake in the loft, quilt pulled tight, though the air wasn't cold. She could feel the town breathing outside, restless, waiting. Somewhere in the distance dogs barked, and then fell silent. Down below, Matthew Riley sat in a chair with his shotgun across his lap, jaw set. Ellen mended quietly, though her needle shook more than once. Sam Fletcher leaned against a stall, twirling a coin like it was another card in a never-ending hand. Sheriff Wilkes walked the boardwalk with uneven steps, trying to look like a lawman, and not a man haunted by his own cowardice. Clara shut her eyes, but sleep didn't come. Every time she tried, she saw lanterns moving toward her through the dark, her past coming fast on horseback. And sure enough, just before first light, the sound came. Hoofbeats, many. Matthew looked up. Sam caught the coin mid-flip. Ellen froze with her needle in the air. Sheriff Wilkes stopped pacing, hat twisting in his hands. Clara rose to her knees and peered through a crack in the loft wall. Out on the eastern road, a line of lanterns bobbed like fiery beads on a necklace. 20 riders, maybe more. At their head sat Silas Langford himself. Her throat went dry. Decoy Micah, the pastor's son, sprinted to the church and hauled the bell rope with everything in him. The clang split the dawn, rough and uneven, but loud enough to wake the whole town. Windows flew open, doors banged, men grabbed rifles, women clutched shawls, children rubbed their eyes and peeked from behind skirts. The bell didn't just wake people, it forced a choice, hide or stand. Clara climbed down from the loft. "I won't hide," she said, voice steady. "If they take me, they'll do it in front of every eye in this town." Jack Callahan, who'd said little all night, nodded once. "Then stand in the street. Don't flinch." Clara's knees shook, but she lifted her chin. The riders rolled into town in a clean wedge, hooves pounding dust. Silas Langford looked sharp as polished silver, coat pressed, gloves pale against the reins. He stopped 10 yards short of the barn. "Sheriff," he called, voice smooth as a sermon, "you've got my runaway. Hand her over." Clara stepped forward, quilt slipping from her shoulders. "I'm not yours," she said, loud enough for the whole street. "Not now, not ever." Gasps rippled. Silas didn't look at her, he looked at the sheriff. "Do your duty. Arrest her under county order." Wilkes swallowed, lips trembling. Then, to everyone's shock, including his own, he shook his head. "No." Silas blinked. "No. She's free," Wilkes said, voice steadier now. "And if the law says otherwise, then the law's a lie." A murmur rose from the townsfolk. Some nodded, others muttered. Silas's eyes hardened. "Then you've chosen sides." He raised his hand. Hank Dobbs, his foreman, spurred forward with a torch. Another rider followed, bottle stuffed with rag in his fist. The crowd gasped as Dobbs swung the torch toward the barn. Clara ran. She didn't think, she just moved. She flung her quilt over the bottle as it arced, smothering fire in smoke and glass. The cloth burned, but she stomped it out with both feet until only blackened threads remained. The barn still stood. Clara straightened, face streaked with soot. The sight of her, small but unbroken, standing over the smoldering ruin of the gift the town had given her, struck harder than any bullet. "That's enough," Amos Hardy roared. He lifted his hammer in one hand and his rifle in the other. "She's ours now. She's this town." Voices rose around him. Mrs. Cafferty shouted agreement. Ellen Riley stepped onto the porch with a rifle of her own. The seamstress raised her musket from a window. The riders faltered. The shot cracked, grazing Jack Callahan's arm as he shoved Clara aside. Blood soaked his sleeve, but Jack didn't slow. He tackled Silas from the saddle, dragging him into the dirt. Gunfire erupted. Smoke filled the street. Horses reared. Townsfolk ducked into doorways and fired back. Sam Fletcher shot with a gambler's calm, each bullet placed with care. Amos swung his hammer into a rider's knee, dropping him screaming. Clara pressed her back to the trough, heart pounding. A rider lunged for her, rope swinging. Ellen fired from the porch, the shot kicking dust at the man's boots. He cursed and wheeled away. Jack wrestled with Silas, fists, and boots, and blood. Dobbs charged to help, but Amos blocked him with the hammer, teeth bared. Through the chaos, Clara heard a child cry out. The boy who'd given her marbles crouched behind a barrel, shaking. Clara darted, grabbed his hand, and pulled him to safety inside the bakery. Mrs. Cafferty threw a rolling pin at the next rider who came close. The battle churned, brutal and messy, but slowly the tide turned. For every shot the riders fired, 2 townsfolk answered. For every shove forward, the street shoved back. Jack drove Silas into the dust, forearm against his throat. Silas spat blood, eyes wild. "You think you've won," he hissed. "I own this count." Jack leaned close, voice like gravel. "Not anymore." Sheriff Wilkes staggered forward, pistol drawn. For the first time in his career, his voice didn't shake. "Silas Langford," he said, loud enough for the whole street. "You're under arrest." Silas laughed, a broken sound. "You don't have the guts." Wilkes cocked the hammer. "Try me." For a moment it looked like Silas might lunge, might force someone else to pull the trigger, but the guns leveled at him from every angle convinced him otherwise. His shoulders sagged. The sheriff snapped iron cuffs onto his wrists. The sound rang like a bell. The riders, seeing their master bound, broke. Some fled down the street. Others dropped weapons and raised hands. Dobbs cursed and tried to run, but Amos's hammer caught him square across the jaw. He crumpled like a sack of grain. Silas Langford, once untouchable, lay shackled in the dust while the town he'd owned stood over him. Silence spread, broken only by sobs and the creak of settling saddles. People began to breathe again. Then, a crack. A bullet splintered wood above Clara's head. Cal Rich, a storekeeper who'd muttered against her since the first loaf of bread, stood in the alley with a tiny derringer shaking in his hand, his face twisted with spite. "She don't belong here," he screamed. Clara froze. Jack turned, rifle half raised. "Don't kill him," Clara said sharply. Jack shifted aim. His shot clipped the derringer clean from Cal's hand, sending it spinning into the dirt. Sheriff Wilkes seized him by the collar and dragged him down the boardwalk, face first. The threat was over, this time for good. The first sun broke over the ridge, painting smoke and dust in gold. The town stirred, not with fear now, but with something else. Resolve, maybe even pride. Mrs. Cafferty was the first to move. She stepped forward with a new loaf of bread, still warm from her oven. For her, she said. Others followed. Ellen brought a fresh quilt, sewn overnight. Amos carried a pair of boots, scuffed but solid. The seamstress laid down a patched dress, blue calico. Children brought trinkets, a whistle, a doll, a painted stone that read brave. The boy with the marbles pressed his prized shooter into Clara's hand. "Keep it," he whispered. Gifts piled at her feet until the barn door could hardly close. Food, clothes, blankets, small treasures, everything a community could spare. Clara stood in the center of it all, tears shining on her cheeks. For the first time she wasn't just a runaway, or a burden, or a rumor. She was part of something. Reverend Harlan stepped forward, Bible in hand. His voice trembled, but not from fear. "This child slept in straw last night. She wakes today surrounded by bread, by quilts, by love. That is the Lord's doing. And it is marvelous in our eyes." "Amen," the crowd answered. Clara pressed the boy's marble into her palm, the quilt over her shoulders, the gifts all around her. Her past was still out there, but for the first time she felt the road ahead belonged to her. It was the sight of a barn turned sanctuary, and a girl who stood her ground until a town remembered its own heart. By dawn she was no longer just the girl in the hay. She was Clara, free, blessed, and surrounded with gifts no man could take away.